Today on Straight Talk Africa, President Obama's African policy advances key strategic goals, strengthening democratic institutions, advancing peace, security, and development. Some U.S. lawmakers and the African diaspora are calling for a reassessment of U.S. African policy. That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. It's Wednesday, May 18th. I am Shaka Ssali.
Happy Wednesday, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Ayan Bior, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll talk about the need for a paradigm shift in U.S.-Africa relations.
And coming up later in our STA inbox, our audience has weighed in on our topic through emails and Facebook comments, and we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
With Africa now a major front line in the global fight against terrorism, U.S. lawmakers and others are asking, is a fundamental change needed in U.S.-Africa relations? My colleague Paul Cisco has more.
The recent inauguration of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has triggered a renewed U.S.-Africa foreign policy discussion inside the walls of the U.S. Capitol. Western delegations walked out of Mr. Museveni's inaugural proceedings over the attendance of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir and Museveni's denouncement of the International Human Rights Court at The Hague that has charged Mr. Bashir with genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Museveni is now into his fourth decade in power. Following the Ugandan presidential election, leading opposition candidate Kizza Besigye was arrested and now faces charges of treason, reportedly for declaring himself the legitimate winner of the election and being sworn in by a member of his Forum for Democratic Change party. President Museveni is one of several African leaders with questionable human rights and governance records that receive considerable U.S. support because of his partnership with America in the fight against terrorism. Some Washington lawmakers and others are asking some tough questions.
My concern is, are we giving countries a free pass who are our partners in our counterterrorism campaigns on human rights and poor governance?
It's a challenge.
America's top diplomat on African affairs, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, would like to see more U.S. assistance for democracy building on the continent.
We condemn human rights abuses. We regularly condemn those abuses by security forces and by governments. And we make clear to these governments that this is a core value for the United States. At the same time, we are committed to firmly working with our partners to address efforts to defeat terrorism.
The United Nations' Abdoulaye Mar Diaye and Christopher Fomunyo of the National Democratic Institute say establishing security and good governance takes time and money.
First, you have to stop the bleeding, and then you can use democracy and good governance to build up a lot of these societies and a lot of these countries.
The toxic combination of poor governance, low human development, and weak social contract that has created this. And this will take time to deal with. It's a long-term investment.
America's counterterrorism partnerships in Africa have some U.S. lawmakers worried.
Al-Shabaab and its predecessors have long troubled Somalia and its neighbors in East Africa, including attacks on American embassies in 1998. Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb have evolved since 9/11 into a vicious regional threat across the Sahel and beyond. Boko Haram, which has declared allegiance to ISIS, will stop at nothing to carry out its grotesque attacks against civilians and communities across Nigeria.
Senator Bob Corker says terrorism breeds on instability and a complex set of conditions and factors.
The most egregious of which appears to be the complete lack of government responsibility for its citizens through corruption and greed, rather than any lack of resources.
Some ask, will America have to make a fundamental shift in its foreign policy towards Africa? And will the United States continue to support the leadership of those nations that have been accused of human rights abuses and governance malfeasance? Because they are key in the fight against global terrorism. Paul Sisko, VOA News.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Now, joining us here in our Washington studios are two distinguished guests. Maria Burnett, senior researcher in the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch in Washington, D.C., and Sylvester Okere, DNC's African Diaspora Liaison, also based here in the nation's capital. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you again on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're most welcome. Where have you been, Maria? I haven't seen you in a very, very long time in this studio.
Let's see, I've been in Uganda a great deal over the last year and in Kenya as well. I continue to manage our work on East Africa.
I remember, of course, meeting you very briefly at the Kampala Selena in the Ugandan capital.
Yeah, on the day of the announcement of the election results.
Yeah, that is correct. Okay, what about you?
Well, thank you, my brother. It's good to be here again. This is a campaign season. We've been really busy with the campaign going on. We've got to get our people positioned.
Very interesting. Well, it's a pleasure, of course, to have you here, and I hope that we'll have a terrific discussion. Let me ask you a question. You just saw a package. Your reaction?
Well, I think these are important questions for the U.S. and U.S. legislators to be asking about what is the right foreign policy approach in Africa. Obviously, at Human Rights Watch, we're firmly committed to seeing all foreign policy be based in respect for human rights. And I think one of our concerns has been, particularly for Uganda, but in several other countries, has been that we've seen a real increase in support from the security assistance side and less support going to democracy and good governance work. And, you know, I think many of us would argue that that needs to be carefully thought through and that security assistance shouldn't overshadow the importance of human rights protections.
What about you, Sylvester?
First, I have to give honor to whom honor is due. I commend President Obama for the enormous work he's been doing, supporting Africa and other nations of the world. I know that there are challenges in Africa, but the approach to solve those problems is where we need to pay attention. Some of the things we've invested money and resources, we need to kind of do a stock checking of what works and what needs to be revamped. So I still thank him for all the work being done, but more need to be done in order for us to have sustainability.
Maria, what about some who argue that you really can't do anything unless you have a country secured? A country that is experiencing at least some element of peace?
Well, I think there's no doubt that stability is important, but there's no reason to think that elections have to bring an end to stability. As President Obama has said, there need to be strong institutions, and that includes electoral commissions and parliaments and others who may well be a check on the power of the executive. So I think the goal is to have both.
The goal is to have both.
Human rights protections and stability. There's no reason to choose between the two.
They are not mutually exclusive.
Well, absolutely not. I mean, they absolutely shouldn't be, and they can't be for countries to flourish.
In fact, some say they should be mutually reinforcing.
Ideally, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen, in Uganda, for example, there's been a lot of concern about failure of service delivery. So while some people are saying, well, there's peace, many people are saying, but we also don't have good quality access to health services. We have a cancer machine that is dysfunctional for many years. There's been a lot of complaints about access to health services and critiques of the education system as well. So it's not all about stability to the detriment of all other services. It's a package for everyone, and citizens have to have their basic rights protected. That means health. It also means the ability to express themselves, to the ability to freely associate and freely assemble.
But if you're a member of the Ugandan elite, of course, you have access to service delivery in South Africa, in Europe, or in North America.
And if you're a government official, sometimes at the expense of Ugandan taxpayers, tragically. Absolutely. It's a problem. Ugandans complain about it a great deal. Very
interesting. What about you, Sylvester?
I think there is a whole lot of stuff we need to focus on when it concerns Africa and human rights. First of all is hunger. I think Bob Marley said that a hungry man is an angry man. Most of the human rights issue, when people are hungry, you got to first of all fill their stomach before you tell them how to wake up in the morning and when to go to work. So when you cannot provide them food and provide them certain things that they can live with their family, take care of their children, every other thing you're telling them, you're just wasting your time. And I think that's the basic human right. And that is where we need to fight corruption seriously, because that is another human right that has been abused and is being supported, or what my president called a safe haven. We need to make sure that those individuals who commit those crimes are taken accountable, so that people, like talking about education, quality healthcare, and so on, those resources that are being siphoned can take care of those things. When people have resources that they need, I don't think we should be having problems and complaining and so on. That's the #1 human right that I would really protect or fight for, is resources.